Oh dear, fighting back with Rafiq. What a terrifying and embarrassing title. It conjures up images of a latter-day El Cid propped up on his old war horse and shot through with arrows, inspiring his troops by his presence in a last attempt to defend Valencia. I'm not El Cid, or anything like him, thank goodness. But we do have a fight on our hands, and we have to organize ourselves so that we can defend our planet and our species against some very destructive forces. The enemy is truly at and indeed inside our gates. Another slight correction to the introductory blurb. I'm not quite halfway round the world. Halfway round the world from you is the Southern Ocean, southwest of Australia, and from all accounts a pretty rough and nasty place it is. Halfway round the world from me is San Gil, Colombia, which is a bit warmer, I think, than where you are. Nevertheless, we're about 10,000 miles apart, and as my oral suggests, keeping the string taut over that distance may be a bit challenging. This is your captain speaking. Please remain calm, everyone. As you may have noticed from the smoke and occasional burst of flame, there's a little bit of a minor dysfunction with one of our starboard engines. This is a contingency we're fully prepared for, and everything is perfectly under control. Nevertheless, purely as a precaution, your co-pilot is taking us to the nearest airport, where we'll be making an unscheduled stop while our ground staff carry out some routine maintenance. The landing may be a little rougher than usual, and our cabin staff will be going round showing you how to adopt the brace position. I repeat, please remain calm and be assured that your safety and comfort are our first consideration. This is a recorded announcement. Recorded? Well, that's encouraging, isn't it? Well, in the same way, and purely as a precaution against any unforeseen interruption to our excellent and highly reliable Skype service, I thought that it would be better to record this chat and come online just for the questions and discussion. You'll also notice that I'm not moving around very much, and you may again be reminded of El Cid. Well, you can check during the Q&A that I'm still alive by asking me some topical questions if you like. What I have found is that moving pictures can get rather blurry and take up a lot of bandwidth sending them. Still pictures are much better, if a little less exciting. Well, the way I move anyway isn't very exciting, so you're not missing much. I know that the usual format is for people to ask the speaker questions during the talk to keep things nicely informal and friendly. And I hope you won't mind too much if we do things slightly differently this time. What I have done is to divide this chat into three parts. The first bit is more serious and earnest, so I thought we'd get that over with first. The second part is equally serious and important, but it's about being positive and assertive in a fun and joyful way. After each session, I'll be happy to be around, technology permitting, for questions and discussions, although I hope that most of the ideas will be coming from you, from the floor. Finally, if we have time, and the charming and hard-pressed workers of Panera Bread are not pushing us out of the door, I thought we might have a bit of a sing-song for the season. Seamus and Rose came up with an excellent idea on the discussion forum for rewriting those boring old daft ditties that the Christians sing at solstice time. I think we should be making a YouTube video of our cracked carols as a sort of global infidel wassail, and I thought we should get a bit of practice in, despite my croaky and tuneless voice. Of course, you may decide to adjourn such shenanigans until after you've got a pint or two under your belt at another venue, or even hold off until the drinking skeptically event. That's entirely up to you. A lot of our self-criticism is that we spend our time preaching to the choir, and yet I've also heard some of us say that we're not actually trying to convert anyone. The idea perhaps of conversion is abhorrent to us, since we're not trying to change people from adherence to one set of mythologies to another. I do get the feeling that we're rather defensive and try to prove that we can be just as good or charitable as faithful folks. Those against us often argue that we are strident and want to impose our will on them. We go out of our way to defend ourselves against that accusation and say that we do not want to eliminate religion at all, but rather to create a secular society where everyone is free to believe what they want. We're involved primarily in an argument of books and book tour speeches. Our activities are primarily self-support. It is not enough. Most of you in the United States are concerned, and very rightly so, against the erosion of the wall of separation. You're right to regard it as a bastion of freedom and science against bigotry and authoritarian indoctrination. The McCarthy era blew a breach in the wall under the guise of defending against godless communism. You need to repair it and secure it against further attack. The power of the United States means that her influence, and the influence of secular government that goes with it, is enormously important. Nevertheless, the intellectual enemy within your walls, the Christians, were essentially defanged by the Enlightenment, even though they long to regain the power they once had. But they remain an enemy of science, reason, and intellectual development. As with all religions, they are essentially child abusers, indoctrinating and pressurizing conformity in children to their own distorted and primitive worldview. Fortunately, you retain a public school system and a system of law and free speech that enables you to fight against them. Nevertheless, the United States is part of the world, an important part, and cannot isolate herself from what is happening outside. The desire for isolation and introspection is understandable. In a way, too, the presence and activism of religious people in the United States is also understandable for similar reasons. The American colonies and the republic which replaced them were a refuge from state religious persecution in Europe. Many religious people sought shelter in her shores. Rather than import the same struggles between people who all thought their particular rival world view was the only true one, the constructors of the new republic decided with great wisdom that the only way to guarantee freedom for all the new citizens was to create a secular government. Those who try to deny your history and claim that the United States was conceived as a Christian nation forget that secularism was instituted not primarily to promote godlessness or atheism, but to prevent religious immigrants from tearing at each other's throats. The United States was, and still is, a haven. It was understandable that the citizens sheltering under her wing would turn their back on the strife they left behind. And yet the reason for their exodus was because they were people of conscience and principle. It's no small thing to leave your home and venture into unknown dangers. The pioneer spirit enhanced their solidarity and in many ways their goodness and sense of empathy. I'm not looking at the New Republic with any misty-eyed notions. Human beings can be cruel and can compartmentalize their minds to avoid facing the reality of their actions. The subjugation of the people already living there in the United States and the importation of slaves are a huge stain on your history. One way that people achieve this compartmentalization of thought, indeed it's probably the most important way, is abdicating personal responsibility and seeking justification in religious texts and claim divine authority. The relationship of the United States and the rest of the world has, certainly in recent history, been an ambiguous one. Huddling together and building a wall against the torments of the world outside, and then, when a certain spark has been ignited, responding with generosity, enthusiasm, and indeed with power. She was right to do so. It was right that the march of fascism be denied, and it was right that the United States lent a hand, for her own sake and that of the rest of the world. Now, you don't need me to lecture you on your own history, and you may think it impertinent of me to do so. You know it far better than I. The reason is that we are facing multiple dangers to the survival of this planet itself, not least of which is the toxic fecundity of our own species. It's almost as though our organism is a metastatic malignancy enveloping and choking the biosphere. The United States is often blamed, and rightly so, for her runaway consumerism. But that's only part of the story. We may wonder why it is that religion has been so enormously successful despite the complexity and power of our brains. Religion promotes the genetic survival of the species, the genetic as against the individual. All religions emphasize so-called sexual morality, and the driver for this is to promote breeding from an early age as possible and for as long as possible. The institution of marriage is a primarily religious one. Needless to say, the population of the rest of the world, together with its demands on diminishing resources, is enormously important to the United States. Religion is also about conflict. Conflict may be a biological mechanism for promoting genetic sustainability. There's no point in having too many males. Religion and other forms of group identity, such as nationalism, promote hatred and feelings of threat from aliens, those who do not belong and adhere to the set of group doctrines. Religion and science cannot coexist. Science has always required sharing. Religion protects itself against unwelcome and challenging ideas, and uses drastic means to do so. In a way, we need to re-engineer our species so as to make it less genetically successful and more successful in a different way. Our success is toxic. We nevertheless have a lot to offer, and we can find a new way, and we have to find a new way to be useful rather than destructive. Now let us be in no doubt. We can no longer sustain the concept of non-interference in other people's ways of life. It threatens us directly. Live and let live is not an option. Now that may sound counterintuitive. Since the end of the Second World War, we've been engaged in a process of decolonization, of giving people the right of self-determination. To some extent, this has only been lip service. Some regard globalization as a form of neo-colonialism. Certainly many of the regimes that have emerged are corrupt, and democracy and freedom of thought are not as widespread or as meaningful as we would like. What responsibility do we have to interfere? I think we have a duty, and not only a duty of self-interest, but a duty to our survival. We also have an ethical duty. It is wrong that women are repressed. It is wrong that children are indoctrinated. It is wrong that children's genitals should be mutilated. Religious apartheid, where people have to carry identity cards specifying their religion, is wrong. It is wrong that people cannot live together or even travel together without being married, and that they cannot marry unless they are of the same state-decreed religion. It is wrong that people should be killed, thrown out of their homes, and persecuted on the basis of that their particular creed differs in slight detail from that of others. Blasphemy laws are wrong. It is wrong to execute people for so-called sexual immorality or for relinquishing their family myths. And this is what is happening in the world. We are living simultaneously in the 21st century and the 15th century. We shrink in horror at the auto da fe of the Inquisition before the Christian Church was defanged. And yet that is happening now in the Muslim world. There is a movement, based in London as it happens, hizbut-tahrir, to create a worldwide political Islamic government under an elected dictator or caliph. It's growing in popularity as people are being persuaded to become disillusioned with their own corrupt governments and to dream of a world in which the glories of the early days of Islam can be recreated. Like all fascist movements, it shares the characteristics of mass uniform and mass enthusiasm under a leader who will save them and restore their self-respect and the glories of the past. Even though in the case of hizbut-tahrir, they haven't got, at least as far as we know, a leader yet. So how do we fight back? We cannot rely on government, although government has an important role. Governments are good at military stuff. It's easy to identify real physical threats and try to defend against them, preemptively if need be. But governments are essentially short-term, and the interest in getting elected is not always the same as the interests of the people. Military stuff is important. There are real threats out there. But that's not the only way we must fight back. Essentially what we are involved in is a fight for minds. And it's a fight that must be fought and won. This is something that's important to all of us. And all of us must be involved. So what do we do? First of all, we must get our brains together. We must carefully plan strategy and be serious about it. Now, although my main interest and background is in the Islamic world, I do realize that the Christian world is on the march too. It's vital that you secure secularism and defend it. Let's learn whatever we can. In the US, there is the CIA to deal with international threats, and the FBI to deal with internal ones. In the UK, similar roles are played by MI6 and MI5. We need to specialize. It's easy to concentrate on things which are in front of your eyes. We cannot afford to neglect what is happening in the rest of the world. Perhaps the best way to do this is by setting up separate specialisms and think tanks, talking with each other, of course. We should not ignore military aspects, and we should study them and advise governments where appropriate. Two of the most important areas we must work on are education and language. Children are enormously important, and to control their minds has always been a high priority in all fascist dictatorships. We need to target and to free their minds. And it's not actually very difficult. There is an enormous thirst for education in the so-called developing world. Everyone wants to get on and to give their children the best opportunity. Overseas education is a highly desirable goal. Now, governments are failing dreadfully to provide what people want. State education is under-resourced and dispirited. It's regarded widely as third-rate. Commercial schools and religious schools fill the breach. Universities, too, are becoming increasingly commercialized. Western countries see and exploit education as an export earner. What this is doing to the Western universities is another matter entirely. Of course, commercial education is only for some, and mainly for those families who do not have much interest in changing the status quo or in using what they learn for the good of their people. This leaves religious schools to provide for the poorer people, and indeed for those parents who distrust the commercial schools and want to safeguard what they see as their children's morals. What we need to do is to learn from the example of the missionary schools during the colonial era. They provided relatively high-quality education at low or null cost and succeeded in spreading their message at the same time. They were very successful, and I think we should emulate them. We cannot rely on commercial education and a limited number of scholarships for the West. We need non-commercial, high-quality education to teach children how to think for themselves. It would be popular, and I'm sure successful in helping to turn the tide of thought away from fascist dreams. How are we going to pay for it? Well, how did the church missionary societies pay for their work? We have to study and plan. It need only have small beginnings. We need schools, and most importantly, libraries and museums. The problem with education in the so-called developing world is that it's very much based on standard textbooks and rote learning. Children learn from authority. This needs to change, and children need to have the resources to explore and discover and think for themselves. Another area is language. There is an enormous disparity between the amount and variety of material that is available in English and other European languages and that in the languages of the so-called developing world. English is very popular, but the way it is taught means that, for example, in Indonesia, people only acquire the language more or less as a fashion accessory. It's not used for serious discourse. They're taught badly from early childhood. I think often it's used in much the same way as slaves were taught, sufficient to understand instructions, but not to read, study, learn, and think in the language. Language is a powerful weapon of state and religious control, and television a ubiquitous means of delivering it. It's simply not good enough to expect people to learn English. We have to bring material into the languages of the people if we're going to be serious about the battle for the minds of the planet. I want to break now for discussion. Afterwards, I'd like to talk briefly about an initiative I think we need to encourage people who have rejected religion or who want to do so to realize that they are not alone.